What's up, yos? Is the Eternal Champion basically all the same character? Michael Moorcock, who is one of the greatest fantasy writers of all time, and definitely of recent days, has a series of characters called the Eternal Champions, and they're all basically different characters in different worlds. However, they're basically the same person in the same multiverse. And so the question is this: are the Eternal Champions different characters in different worlds with different stories? Or are the Eternal Champions basically a way to tell the same story in the same world over and over again in different ways? Now, I love Michael Moorcock. I love the Elric saga. I love the Eternal Champions, all of them: Corum, Hawkmoon, Ericos, all of the Eternal Champions. I think Elric and the Elric saga is pretty much probably one of the best fantasy series of all times, fantasy novels of all times. But the thing is, what always pops up in my mind, and I always question, wait a minute, all of these different characters, they're basically the same character. It's sort of a way to tell a story that's sort of like the same character in different worlds. But I think that really the Eternal Champions are different characters in different worlds, but they're just all connected in one way. And I think that's brilliant, because I think it's a way to tell a lot of different stories in a lot of different worlds with a lot of different scenarios and characters, and somehow bring them all together and create one world at the same time. So it's the multiverse, and it's got all of the different worlds of all the different characters, and it's also all of the different characters, but they're all the same because they're all aspects of the Eternal Champion. It's a really interesting thing that he did, and I think it works out. And I do think that there's a lot of differences between the Eternal Champions. Obviously, Corum is a lot different than Elric, just in the way his personality is, the specifics of his powers. Ericos is a lot different than Elric. Hawkmoon is different than Elric. All of these characters are so different from each other, but somehow they are just aspects of the Eternal Champion. They're just basically different faces of the same character. And what I like about that is that you could take an Elric story, and then you could take an Ericos story, and you can blend them together. You can have one character go from one world to another world. It's cool because you're telling all these different stories, but you can interconnect them. You can have one character go into another character. They did the same thing with comic books. I think with some superheroes, they did, Marvel did that, where it's just there'll be a Batman story, and all of a sudden Superman will just appear in it. And it's an interesting way. It's a crossover sort of a thing, It could be a Iron Fist, and then there's a crossover with another character. Just what they did with Daredevil, and they crossed over Daredevil and the Punisher, which was two different characters in two different worlds, but they crossed over and they became in one series, they became both characters in the same series. And I think that's the added thing, the added benefit, the added thing that you can do by having different characters in different worlds, is have them interact with each other and have them cross over, so that you can not only experience these different characters in different worlds, but also you can experience stories where these characters interact with each other and talk to each other. Like in the comic book, The Balance Lost, which I thought was really good. I liked it because it was a very, very new story about the Eternal Champions. And what I liked about that is, over just some of the other things that come out in comic book form, the Elric of Manibone, the Elric saga coming out in comic book form. Now, it's cool to see Elric coming out in comic book form because of the art and the way, and the way it's just a different way to experience a story. But the thing is, I already read that story. I already know what the story is going to do. I already experienced that story. Like, I don't need to read it again in a comic book form, but when the balance lost and like other stories, when they come out in comic book form and they're original, well, now that's a new story. That's a new experience. Like, that's the thing about like redoing Elric in comic book form. And a lot of people like it. I mean, a lot of people like it. I like it too. I like to look at the art of the Elric stories in comic book form, but at the end of the day, it's the same story. Like, you've already read it. You already know what it's about. It's not that interesting. Maybe they put, they put some art to it. Okay, cool. You could have just made like art of Elric of Melniboné. It would have been the same thing, right? So, and so that's what I like about it, is that you can constantly tell new stories. Even in like like one of the episodes of the Elric saga, which was Sailor on the Seas of Fate, which is like the second book that came out. Now, a lot of these books came out in different orders. A lot of the stories came out in different orders. Things happened in the future and then in the past and all kinds of things. But as far as I remember, the Sailor on the Seas of Fate was the second book of the Elric saga, right after Elric of Melniboné. In this story, Elric meets his other selves. He meets all of these other characters on the ship, which are aspects of him in the future, him in other dimensions, him in other worlds, and they're all him, but they're so different from each other, and they don't know each other, and don't recognize each other, that they could be different characters. It's so cool to do that, because I don't know any other author who figured that out to do that. Like, I don't know any other author or anything who actually made different worlds with different characters, but the characters are aspects of the same character. And the worlds are just all different worlds of one gigantic multiverse. And what you could do with that is you could tell separate stories. You could tell how these stories are similar, because with like Eternal Champion, there's a lot of similarities. One is they're the Eternal Champion. They're fated to fight and just be in constant combat and conflict throughout their whole life. It's their fate to, be at war, just like it is like Elric's fate to have Stormbringer, which is like a sword that gives him all of his power. With Stormbringer, he's the most powerful, pretty much, character in the universe or the multiverse, right? Without Stormbringer, he's hardly powerful at all. Yes, he's got some magic spells and whatever, but he basically doesn't have a lot of inner strength. He doesn't have like a lot of strength. He's albino, and he's not a very strong, like his body's not really that strong, and he's kind of weak, but with Stormbringer, he becomes so powerful that he's overkill. Like, he's just like can take down gods and giants and things like that, and other really powerful sort of like demons or sorcerers or whatever, right? And that's pretty cool. And that's a lot of the same kind of like story that Moorcock tells, which is like even like Quorum. I mean, without his hand and his eye, he's really not that powerful. But with the hand and the eye, he becomes like really powerful. He can see in other dimensions, and his hand is like basically a hand of a god or something like that, who kind of does its own thing. It'll just like do its own thing. It's the same thing with Stormbringer. Stormbringer will just like, it's a sword, but he'll like kill people on its own. Like, you don't need to really hold the sword. The sword will just like fly out of his hand and kill one of his friends. And so, if you look at something like Ericos, which I think, like, the Ericos, in my opinion, the Ericos stories are the best. I really like the Elric. I started reading with the Elric ones. I got into that very, very quickly, and I really liked the Elric. That was my favorite until I read the Ericos stories. And the Ericos stories is the actual Eternal Champion stories. Because the other ones are like, yeah, they're aspects of the Eternal Champion, but Ericos is the Eternal Champion. What I like about Ericos is he's not like, Elric is cool, but Elric is melancholy. Elric is depressed. Elric is sad about everything. Elric is like not always in a good mood. He's like really, he's in the slums all the time. And Ericos doesn't have that depression. He's not like that sad of a character. He's more of like a strong hero. Whereas like Elric is like kind of weak, but his powers and his like magic and his sword make him strong, you know? It's sort of the same thing with Corum. Like he doesn't really have a lot of power outside of his eye and his hand, you know, and that's kind of like typical. It's a very common to see that in a lot of fantasy stories where it's just like, oh, they're basically regular people, but some element or some object gives them their power, you know, something like that. And so in that way, certain stories are the same. The fact that they're all fantasy, the fact that they're all kind of the same kind of stories, where just like fantasy heroes against fantasy villains, sort of like that. And also each world is different enough from each other that you can call these characters separate and you can call these worlds separate, but at the same time it's a way to tell the same story in different ways, in a way, right? And it's also a way to tell different stories that all kind of combine into one story. You know, different stories that just like, when you bring them together, they're one story. You know, they're in the same world. They're basically talking about the same character, but you're able to use this one character and change little things about them so that it's different enough to make different stories. And there's no other author that I find does this. Piers Anthony doesn't do this. I mean, like the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings doesn't do this. Like J.R. Tolkien doesn't do this. Like nobody does it. J.R. Tolkien did create a world, and even the guy like that did Dune created this world and stuff like that. It's always like been one world. And what's interesting about the multiverse is it's not one world. It's actually written in separate books with separate stories, and it rarely does cross over. However, it is always like looked upon as one multiverse. And the reason it's a multiverse is because each world is a universe. And you're able to kind of like cross over. And you're able to cross over not only in space from one place to the next, but in time. Because a lot of these stories are set further into the past and further into the future. Elric is on a lot of different planes of existence. And there's also these like Elric-like characters who are also on different planes of existence. Like the albino. Like there are stories about like there's a book called The Albino in America, right? And it's more of a modern story, but they took Elric, they put him into a modern setting, and they created a completely new book, a completely new novel because of that. So what he's doing a lot of is changing just little things about it. Well, let's do Elric, but let's put him in this world. Let's put him in the present. Let's put him in a modern world, right? Let's put him like in another universe. Let's have him cross over. Like Elric at the end of time also like crosses over into other worlds and things like that. And I just find it's a nice way to create not only different worlds, but also create one world. You know, one world where all of these different worlds are connected and they're part of one world. And so like that's what I think is so cool about it, is it works really well because as a writer, you've already kind of figured out, okay, this is what this world looks like, but I'm going to keep adding things to this world. I'm going to keep adding dimensions. I'm going to keep adding like changing things around, putting one character with another. In one story of Elric, of the Elric saga, there is 4 characters that are the same character, and these are known as the 4 who are one. by themselves, they cannot defeat this evil foe. It was an evil wizard who basically was taking over the whole land. And by themselves, they could not defeat him. But together, these four characters basically joined each other to create this one creature called the Four Who Are One. And, you know, when you have like four people with 2 legs and 2 arms, now you have one person with 8 legs and 8 arms, wielding magic weapons of power. And the way that Moorcock kind of puts these characters together, it's cool because even though he's talking about one multiverse and one character, he's talking about this one character in so many different ways that it creates all of these different novels, all of these different worlds, ways of building and world building in ways that are always new and always different. And they're never like rehashing it. He's not just like retelling the same story over and over again. He's telling new stories, adding new worlds, and connecting them all together as one humongous multiverse. And I really do think that's a magnum opus, a really good body of work when you're just writing, is just to like expand and expand and expand on your world building, on your character building, and on the different ideas that you have and make them work in different ways. So yeah, so that's what I think about all of the multiverse and the Eternal Champion, all the different Moorcock characters and stories and heroes. Let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you want. That'd be cool. And yeah, check out my other videos and share this one with your friends if you want. And I will see you guys in another video later.